It's a beautiful day to blaze some good, a beautiful day to blaze some good. Would you be kind? Please light mine.
Roll up.
right. Welcome to Beans and Greens. And this week's episode is, well, if you've already seen the movie, and you know what movie I'm talking about, but it's going to be the movie Animal Farm. So, this movie is a reinterpretation of George Orwell's, originally a book turned into a movie or animated movie, and this is just a reimagining with that, with Andy Serkis as the director, which being, we all know him from Gollum. Also, Black Panther 2, Claw. I think it's Ulysses Claw. That was like the two best roles for him. And we also have appearances or voice actors. One being one prominent voice actor that we know is Seth Rogen. And to watch the movie, he's the pig Napoleon. And it just dawned on me before starting this. Napoleon, the character in the movie, had a Napoleon complex. Okay. So all right. So before we get started and go into it, because I got notes. This movie was definitely a metaphor for life. Before we get started, though, trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So let's see if we can get some subscriptions from. So if you're watching this, go ahead and please. I don't give a shit if you like it. Just subscribe right now. That would be great. But then again, why would you subscribe if you didn't like it? So if you subscribe because you liked it, but then don't hit the like button, I don't know. Maybe just hit just the subscribe button. Yeah, so anyway, just trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So yeah, just please subscribe. All right, so to the movie at hand. We go from movies such as Forever Purge and the first Purge being the previous episode, and even Constant Gardener being the previous episode before that, and Dark Waters, and see, so all these other movies they're just basically dark. Just to piggyback off the title for the last movie I mentioned. And this one was a little bit lighthearted. And again, like I said, this was a reinterpretation. Now, one of the things that I can say for sure is a movie such as this, right? The plot, how it ends, it just, I think how the movie ended, I think Andy Serkis did a disservice to the movie itself, and I don't remember how positive the original ended. But knowing that this movie is basically a metaphor for a life, a metaphor for again, being that these movies are to reflect the way things are in real life, this movie itself is a metaphor for life as we are living now. But there's no end. This movie has an end, and it has a happy ending, which you want to see. You want to see the happy ending, but again, knowing what this movie symbolizes and knowing how life is right now, there isn't a happy ending. And knowing from the previous movie from George Orwell that we reviewed and the other book that he wrote in 1984, that The tyranny has been created in such a way that it's supposed to last forever. And the aspect that takes it to the point where they can make this go on forever is through the mental, right? You create these movies to entertain thoughts. Those thoughts manifest into action, and that action is what runs society. So here we have this animal farm, right? Let's bring out the notes. Just bringing out the notes. Obviously, you heard me say that. So you have this farm, right? And it's owned by sort of a neglectful owner. And you see the animals, right, in the beginning being herded onto this truck that turns out to be a truck headed to the slaughterhouse because the truck is going, the farm is being foreclosed on. And the animals don't really know any better. Only one of the animals turns out he can read. Like an animal can read and write and understand. But if you understand that, we refer to ourselves as animals, right? We're referred to also as animals. As a matter of fact, as I understand, we have social security numbers, right? Which is basically our barcode in number form. So what the barcode, the information that when the barcode is scanned on a product, those lines represent a numerical value in the machine, and based on the numerical value, whatever item is scanned has a value and does this X, Y, and Z. So we have the same thing, only we call it social security number, and it also once we use that social security number, we already have our whole life attached to that number, and we're assigned the value based on the number, and we're traded based off that number on the stock exchange, right? That is far from my understanding, which makes us nothing more than glorified animals. So we have these animals on the farm that created a culture, created these parallel lives based off of just living on the farm, and now it's about to be upended. And they figure out because two of the animals actually can read, and they revolt, and they're basically there now to run the asylum, basically the animals themselves, after getting rid of the humans, or so they thought. Now, one thing that changed from the original, and that's why I have to say this is a reinterpretation, is because we see drones in this movie. So the original didn't have drones in it, but I do remember from 1984 they had drones in that movie, So, wow. Anyway, so what happens when now, what happens now that convicts run the asylum, basically? Now we have the animals in control. So it's one of the first things that we notice is happening is one of the lead pigs decides that we need to create these rules and we have to follow these rules. Then we have the Napoleon pig sort of throwing down on that, saying, I thought we're free, right? Because the idea was they were free from humanity. And they thought amongst themselves that we're all animals and we're all equal, we're all free, but we have to follow these rigid rules, right? And we see this sort of play out in a lot of different movies. This sort of underlying thing in a lot of movies, kind of makes me think of Hunger Games, because spoiler, after all of the different movies that they've gone through and the different trials and tribulations, they finally killed the main leader, the bad guy, right? Only for the opposition leader to now then become the tyrant that they initially fought of, but only in a different sense. So it was just sort of how you have 4 years, you have basically we had 4 years of democratic rule in this country, and it was tyrannical, and now we have Republican, which is just as tyrannical, but on a whole different. They have their things they go after. So it was the same idea in Hunger Games, right? So now you go from a tyranny going after you. Now you're a part of that tyranny going after those that went after you initially. So it was a basic cycle back and forth. And eventually we saw the main character in Hunger Games. She also killed the new leader. So it was like basically, do you go with the devil or how about no devil, right? And obviously we see in that. So in this movie, it's a sort of similar thing, because we see at the end, and I can skip to the end, it's okay, because blood. We see at the end, the main pig, the one that could read, the one that had all the, was basically the intermediary from the animals to the power structure of the pigs. He even came to the conclusion himself that both ways were not ways that we needed. We didn't need a rigid set of rules, which what the humans implemented, as well as what Napoleon implemented, which then turned out the same way that how the humans, greedy corporate type humans, would run a corporation, right? So he concluded that basically how society runs best is if we run it as a collective, where we collectively come to, it's basically just setting the social norms by which humanity will run, and giving everybody the space to live within those laws without being micromanaged, at the threat of a gun. So that's basically the conclusion the movie comes to. But in order to get to that point, you see that the farm initially, one of the things you mainly have to realize is the farm is being foreclosed on, right? Obviously, how they go to get their independence, and it's being foreclosed on by the bank, and we have someone who wants to buy it, part of a bigger corporation, right? That looks to buy farmland, and it's basically a corporate farm where you have this army. So you have like it's an army of workers from this big corporation that is like surrounded, or surrounds this last bit of farmland. And of course we have the corporate figure, which reflects what we see nowadays in the corporations. It was the older, skinny boss babe woman, sort of short hair, real mean, sort of a Cruella de Vil sort of attitude, but more reflecting today's aesthetic for a woman. And of course, now, and here's the funny part. And of course, the animals, like I said, they gain independence, and through their independence, they figure that they have to work and farm this land in order to, one, get the grain they need to be able to eat, and then they eventually find out that they also need to be able to make money to be able to save the farm, because the bankers keep coming back and trying to foreclose on the farm. But somehow these animals figure out to make money, and eventually they save the farm from being foreclosed on. But now we see, again, something that plays out, because it plays out in today's society, because we have this big corporate owner, this big corporate farm, sort of plotting how to get this last farmland in this area from these animals. Again, now you imprint actual human life over what we see here, and you see people's daily struggle to create commerce for themselves, to put food on their table, and to maintain that. Because being able to maintain the lifestyle in which we live, as we see every year, it just changes. The price of everything has gone up so much. There's a lot of times where you have to make a decision, right? Am I going to buy this week, or am I going to buy that this week? Where it was before, you'd be able to buy both of the items you needed. Just an example. Let's say you wanted, say, milk and bread, right? But prices are such that maybe this week, because bread is something you need more, that you don't get the milk and you get the bread, because you can make sandwiches and shit with the bread. Can't take a bowl of cereal to work. But next week you'll be able to buy the milk. But then next week comes, and then you have maybe a bill due, and that bill needs to be taken care of right now, because if it's not, whatever service that bill covers is going to be turned off. So you don't get the milk because you got to pay this bill. Then the beginning of the month comes around, and now you have to pay rent, electricity. So All of that's going up. And that's one of the things we see reflected in this boss of this corporation, because through interaction with the Napoleon pig and just telling the story, this person that owns this corporation, this boss babe, if you will, there's a point where she admits she is trying to increase the prices of certain vital services. And in the case of the movie, it's electricity. And it turns out that where the farm is, they can use sort of, it's like a waterfall. They can create a dam and basically generate electricity from that dam, which then the leader of this corporation, the owner of this corporation, can then now charge more, increase the price of electricity. And how do we get to that point? And how we get to that point is something that we see played out again in all of the different societies, all of the different countries, all up and down North America, Central America, South America, all of what we call the so-called third world countries, where the leaders of these corporations go into these countries, where the leadership of these countries, the leadership who, in many cases, such as the movie, were sort of the tyrannical leaders or faction that, through manipulation, in many cases, even some what showed in this movie, violence, because as you remember, we see in the movie, the pigs start to separate themselves from the rest of the animals because they're running the farm now, and again they form that tyrannical government, so as you will, as so could be in the movie. What we see is now the corporate entities mixing with the corrupt leadership in order to now sell off the assets and control the assets on the farm, because we even get to a point where the Napoleon pig sees the rest of the animals on the farm as nothing more than as assets they can sell off, which we see in society play out, because again, and we know this from there was I'm thinking Diary of a Hitman, but it's what is that? Damn, I should have looked it up for it because it just came to me. But it's basically a government fixer. And what this guy does is he goes to these third world dictators and says, "Hey, we want to control your resources, X, Y, and Z. We'll give you X amount of money. All you have to do is sign it over to us. Now, if you don't do that, what we will do is we'll create chaos and discord in your country, and then we'll send in the military." So it doesn't get to that point in a sense. It's played out smaller because corporate boss babe lady gets in with Napoleon, the Napoleon pig, who, like I said, has elevated himself and the rest of the pigs above the rest of the animals on the farm. So he's working all the animals to death, where he's now in the big house. Now, one of the things that I find funny about this movie is, of course, the boss lady. Name is Pilkington. And it makes me think of Carl Pilkington from. There's an idiot. He did Idiot Abroad, and just he was on X. What is that? It's like a radio station in England, XFM, I believe it is. Anyway, it's Ricky Gervais, Stephen Merchant, and then Carl Pilkington. So that's weird because prior to seeing Idiot Abroad, I've never heard that name, Pilkington. But that is what we call the name in the movie, like in actual life, the name, because I associate it with Carl Pilkington, just seems normal, different from what I know being in America. But in the movie, the name, the way it's said, and just the actual name, it just seems sort of pompous. Now, of course, I'm not going to give you the whole. I'm not going to basically tell you the whole movie. You have to actually go see the movie. But again, I want to show how these movies you can just basically overlay life in the movie, or overlay it onto life and see the parallels. It gives you a basic insight to. I think it's more of not a condition. Well, yeah. It's a slave condition, and how you can manipulate manipulate the mind, that then brings in this control system that, as we see in 1984, through mental manipulation supported by violence, will now have animals on a farm thinking they're free, when actually they're just nothing more than animals on a farm. And no matter what you give them, no matter what you give them on the farm, as long as you keep feeding them and keep feeding them and keep feeding them, they'll fight to stay on that farm, working those hard jobs, just as long as you give them what they want. And true freedom doesn't have a rigid set of rules created by one person and sort of forced upon everybody else, but it's a collective of people, a collective individuals who use their individuality in order to create and come to an agreement on the social norms, again, like I said before, on the social norms in which society will be run. But people are so rigid in their ways of thinking that you got to have this set of rules and you have to follow this set of rules and this person must rule, and it gives you the whole idea. Who said these people can do X, Y, and Z? Who said these people can rule, right? And you see with a lot of monarchies, it's sort of a divine right to rule. So in other words, God. And so often we see that, religion is used as a way to control, again, It's just another psychosis. It can't really be described any other way, because how psychotic people become at the idea of in a basic way, sort of, my that whole my dick is bigger than your dick, my God is better than your God, or my God says I must do X, Y, and Z to you in order to justify whatever. It's all part of the psychosis. And you see that in the movie with the Napoleon pig, how he's able to manipulate and not just manipulate, but then using violence in order to back up that manipulation, using violence to force on his set of rigid rules, which are just his basically, you look at it, he could be the Republican, while the other pig that was banished from the farm would be the Democrats. And I mean, we go back to the previous movie, Citizen Vigilante. It was the same thing in that movie, because the vigilante in the movie was going after criminals criminally. So he's, breaking and entering their homes and killing them and battering people, and the people are bad, but does that make him any better, that he wouldn't start out as the bad? Is he still good after killing all these people that did all these bad things? Same thing here. All of the stories, all of the episodes, all of the movies in each episode, they intertwine. And they tell a story that keeps leading to what we see, keeps leading to what we see is going to happen in the future. It's sort of a blueprint. Citizen Vigilante is a movie about a person that operates in this environment that was created in Animal Farm by the same propaganda that was used to sort of herd the animals on the farm into this sort of social norms. The Purge, the Forever Purge, and the First Purge are also symptoms of the same psychosis. That we see fostered amongst the animals in Animal Farm. So that same mentality, if the Animal Farm expanded their farm and had, say, a whole city, at some point, the ideas that we see in the First Purge and Forever Purge and Citizen Vigilante, those ideas would have played out in society created by those animals in Animal Farm, if we would say an expanded version of Animal Farm. All I gotta say is true freedom doesn't come at the end of a gun. Day is long, the sun is hot. You might as well smoke if you got some pot. I'm out.